For years, scientists wondered about how the people who live in France can eat a high-fat diet and stuff like butter and all these high-fat foods, and yet seemingly showed low rates of cardiovascular disease, since eating a lot of fat in food was supposed to be associated with as a causation of cardiovascular disease, and yet the French seem to be immune to that. Some scientists seem to trace it to the French habit of drinking red wine with each meal. And this was termed the French paradox, meaning that these people seemed to eat whatever they wanted, more or less. And there was something in red wine that seemed to protect them. As time went on, the active ingredient in red wine was thought to be a compound called resveratrol. As it turned out, that it really wasn't that simple. For one thing, it was the actual fact that a lot of the French people were not obese. They were far more active. They did other things that helped to prevent cardiovascular disease and more or less neutralized their consumption of fat in food. It wasn't so much the red wine, although red wine is good for you up to a certain point, 2 glasses a day. Any more than that, and it reverses and becomes toxic, because alcohol, people don't realize it. It's what they call myotoxic. It actually destroys muscle fibers in large amounts. It's very, very bad for somebody working out. But I'm getting off topic here, because what I wanted to talk about here was this resveratrol, which was thought to be the active ingredient to explain the French paradox. But then scientists actually looked at the resveratrol content of red wine, and they realized that red wine actually had very small amounts of resveratrol, not enough to really impart the type of health benefits that the French were getting from whatever it was. I mean, it turns out it was their whole lifestyle that actually lowered their rates of heart disease. And then over the years, it turns out the rates of cardiovascular disease have been creeping up in France as the French start to adopt more typically American type diets like fast food and all that kind of stuff. But anyway, the point is that let's take a look at resveratrol. Somebody left a comment under one of my videos. They wanted some information about resveratrol, and it is a very interesting compound. It was first isolated in 1940, but it didn't get a lot of publicity until just a couple of years ago. Resveratrol basically is produced by plants as a protective compound. It's a potent antioxidant, and it protects the plants against some of the negative effects of, for example, extreme ultraviolet light. And this is termed a phytoalexin, is the chemical term for a protective plant compound that's produced by plants that protects them. Resveratrol has many possible effects, but I also want to state, as I have in past videos, the majority of beneficial effects shown by resveratrol have occurred either with animals or in vitro, meaning test tube studies. The amount of actual human studies, and there are human studies, but they tend to be relatively few in comparison. The animal studies are absolutely spectacular, but the human studies are kind of lukewarm, to say the least. But resveratrol basically was popularized by a gerontologist or a geneticist, a scientist who works at Harvard, originally from Australia, named David Sinclair. David Sinclair came out years ago, and he was one of the people that claimed that resveratrol was probably the key factor in the French paradox. And he also talked about mice experiments where giving them resveratrol greatly extended their lifespan. And Sinclair went on to, there's a problem with resveratrol as far as oral bioavailability. I'll talk about it later, meaning that when you take oral doses of resveratrol, most of it is degraded in the liver to kind of what they call metabolites. That's the majority of resveratrol that gets in the blood, all these metabolites. They don't really know if the metabolites have bioactivity in cells, but as far as resveratrol, only 14% of it gets into the body after digestion, after oral intake, I should say. So Sinclair decided to produce a synthetic form, and he formed a company to, you can't patent a natural compound. So drug companies would not do research on substances like resveratrol because there's just no money in it for them. To test any type of substance, whether it's a drug or a natural substance, you have to spend literally almost billions in research and development. And no drug company is going to do that with a natural compound like resveratrol because it simply can't be patented. It's a natural compound. So what they usually do, and this is what Sinclair did, is they develop a synthetic analog. This allows the compound to be patented and sold as a drug. Now, the compound that Sinclair and his associates developed was supposedly much more bioavailable than the natural resveratrol, and they actually wound up selling the company to for over $700 million to a larger company, but it wound up in limbo. This drug never made it to the market. It apparently didn't produce the results that they expected, so it just went nowhere. But this isn't to say that resveratrol hasn't shown some beneficial effects, at least in animals. For example, resveratrol has demonstrated neuroprotective effects in several in vitro test tube and live animal models of Alzheimer's disease. Apart from its potent antioxidant and anti-inflammatory roles, evidence suggests that resveratrol also facilitates non-amyloidogenic breakdown of the amyloid precursor protein, or APP. Let me translate that. This was taken from a study. I'm just reading it from the study. What that means is the amyloid precursor protein is a protein produced in the brain that produces certain forms of a cleaved off protein called beta amyloid, particularly beta amyloid 42, which is considered one of the causes, the accumulation of beta amyloid 42, which is called an unfolded protein or an abnormal protein, is it's considered one of the main causes of Alzheimer's disease. Beta amyloid and another protein called tau, TAU. Those are considered the underlying causes of Alzheimer's. Anyway, resveratrol promotes the removal of neurotoxic amyloid beta peptides. So it can actually, resveratrol in test tubes can actually remove beta amyloid from isolated cells. And in doing so, it slows down the pathology involved with Alzheimer's disease. Resveratrol also reduces damage to neuronal cells via a variety of additional mechanisms. Most notably is the activation of NA-dependent histone deacetylase enzymes termed sirtuins. And this is what David Sinclair talked about, the fact that resveratrol activates a enzyme called sirtuin 1 in particular, which is a very cell-protecting substance. In fact, sirtuin 1 is increased when you go on a calorie-restricted diet, which has been shown in various animal species to extend life. The only known way to actually extend life in animals is through caloric restriction, and they think one of the main mechanisms is that caloric restriction activates sirtuin 1 or SIRT1, and if resveratrol activates SIRT1, it would be what they call a calorie restriction mimetic, meaning it produces some of the same effects as a reduction of calories without having to reduce calories. However, in spite of the considerable advances in clarifying the mechanism of action of resveratrol, it is unlikely to be effective as a monotherapy or single therapy in Alzheimer's disease due to its poor availability, biotransformation, and requisite synergism with other dietary factors, which I'll discuss a little bit later. However, a 2017 study showed that treatment of mild to moderate Alzheimer's disease for 52 weeks with resveratrol in doses of up to 1 gram by mouth twice daily or 2 grams a day attenuated progressive declines in structural damage to the brain by proteins such as beta amyloid and increased cognition, increased thinking ability. Resveratrol, another possible benefit of resveratrol is that it can lower elevated blood pressure, as shown in a 2015 study in the journal Clinical Nutrition. They think it does this because As an antioxidant, resveratrol might help preserve nitric oxide, which is normally rapidly oxidized right after being produced in the endothelium or lining of the blood vessels through the actions of nitric oxide synthase on arginine. It gets a little complicated, but let's just say that resveratrol can extend the activity of nitric oxide. By doing that, it helps to lower blood pressure. Now, resveratrol is classified as a polyphenol compound, and it's found naturally in red wine, grapes, berries, skins, and seeds, and particularly in the dry roots of the plant Polygonum cuspidatum. In fact, that is the main supplemental source. When you buy resveratrol supplement, it's in the form of trans resveratrol, which is the active. There's two forms of resveratrol, cis and trans. And trans it's thought to be the active form, and that's what's in the supplement. And it's produced. Almost all resveratrol supplements are derived from Polygonum cuspidatum, which is a plant that is very rich in resveratrol. Now, red wine is thought to be a good source, and when the French paradox stuff came out, they were telling people ran to start drinking red wine, thinking that it would extend their life and prevent heart disease. But the truth of the matter is, the concentration of resveratrol in red wine ranges from 0.1 to 14.3 milligrams per liter. In red wine, there's hardly any in white wine at all. White wine contains like trace amounts. But to get the amount of resveratrol shown to be beneficial in animal studies would require drinking gallons, probably thousands of gallons of red wine, and you would die from alcohol poisoning before you get any benefit from resveratrol. So drinking wine, and besides which, over the years they've analyzed wine and found that it's a combination of resveratrol and other factors in wine that imparts the beneficial effects of wine on health, such as other polyphenols and also a compound called quercetin. It's a combination of ingredients. That's the way nutrition works. Nutrients tend to work together. And in red wine, there's no one isolated compound that produces the health effects. It's a combination of various compounds working together. As I said, in plants, resveratrol exerts antioxidant function by protecting against sun damage. And again, to repeat, much of the research on resveratrol has involved animals and test tubes using very high amounts, much greater doses than you'd ever find at any natural source. That's an important point. Resveratrol also offers beneficial effects on blood lipids or fats. When provided to mice, it lowers the levels of elevated triglyceride or blood fat, low-density lipoprotein, and total cholesterol, while increasing levels of protective high-density lipoprotein. But perhaps the most celebrated aspect of resveratrol is the life extension benefits. As I said, it does that by activating SIRT2 or SIRT1, and that same enzyme is also activated by caloric restriction. A review of studies exploring this connection of resveratrol and extended lifespan found that resveratrol increased lifespan by 60% in the organisms that were studied, but the effect was strongest in organisms that were less related to humans, such as worms and fish. So if you're a worm or a fish, resveratrol in large doses will definitely extend the lifespan. So if there are any worms or fish listening, take heed. I know a lot of worms, but anyway, that's another story. Resveratrol may help to prevent type 2 diabetes by helping to boost insulin sensitivity. One way it does this is by increasing a glucose transporter called GLUT4. GLUT4 works in muscle to push glucose into the muscle. It's one of the reasons why working out will actually increase insulin sensitivity, prevent diabetes, without having anything to do with insulin, because exercise stimulates the activity of GLUT4. Well, so does resveratrol. Resveratrol also boosts a substance called adiponectin, which is a adipokine, or a compound or a protein produced in fat cells. Adiponectin is known to increase insulin sensitivity, and resveratrol increases, so that's another way it helps to prevent diabetes. Resveratrol induces the secretion of the gut incretin hormone, glucagon-like peptide 1, which also increases insulin sensitivity and combats diabetes. In fact, some of the newer diabetes drugs are synthetic analogs of glucagon-like peptide 1 because, again, because glucagon-like peptide 1 is a natural compound, it can't be patented and sold by drug companies. So what they do is they create synthetic analogs that where they could sell it and make billions, But the problem with glucagon-like peptide analogs is that one of the possible side effects is pancreatic cancer. So this is a drug that I personally would not take. I would avoid that drug like poison. Anything that's linked to pancreatic cancer, forget it. That's the most fatal type of cancer. Less than 5% survival rate after 5 years. Also, finally, related to diabetes, resveratrol activates AMPK, which I've talked about in previous videos. This is a compound that's produced when your body gets low in energy, particularly the muscles when it starts to get depleted of ATP, the immediate energy source. AMPK is released. AMPK, among other things, helps your muscles to oxidize fat. When AMPK is released in the muscle, the body converts from burning carbohydrate or glucose into fat. Of course, the bad part about AMPK is it also inhibits muscle protein synthesis, which means it has a kind of catabolic effect in muscle too. But that's another story. Resveratrol also protects against oxidative stress, which makes diabetes worse. And finally, it also lowers inflammation, which is one of the reasons why diabetes is so deadly, because it stimulates systemic inflammation, which leads to heart disease, cancer, and other very serious illnesses. Some studies suggest that resveratrol may alleviate joint pain. One way it does this is by blocking the release of various inflammatory mediators, including the same inflammatory mediators that are implicated in the current COVID-19 pandemic. These inflammatory mediators are thought to be the cause of the most serious effects of COVID-19, such as what they call what's it called? Cytokine storm. These inflammatory mediators are cytokines, or proteins released from the immune cells. And as I said, most of them are very inflammatory and damaging. And resveratrol can help to block these inflammatory mediators. So it might be useful not only in preventing, in helping to prevent the more serious cases of COVID-19, but also by these inflammatory mediators are heavily involved in the production and the stimulation of joint pain and arthritis. One study involved injecting resveratrol in the knee joints of rabbits with arthritis and found that these rabbits suffered less damage to their cartilage. Resveratrol may also help to prevent cancer. This is quoting from a study here. I'm going to read from a study. We have shown recently that trans resveratrol is absorbed much more efficiently than catechin and quercetin in humans after oral consumption. Taking this and the relative concentrations in red wine into account, together with the present results, we conclude that trans resveratrol may be the most effective anti-cancer polyphenol present in red wine as consumed orally by healthy human subjects. Now, that was one study. Resveratrol can exert chemopreventive efficacy on the migration and invasion of cancer cells by inhibiting the related pathways and target molecules. Although these findings display the anti-metastatic potential, that means it helps to prevent the spread of cancer, more patient-oriented clinical studies demonstrating the marked efficacies of resveratrol in humans are still needed. In animal and test tube studies, resveratrol has been shown to fight several kinds of cancer cells, including gastric or stomach, colon, skin, breast, and prostate cancer. Resveratrol appears to help prevent both the growth and spread of cancer. It can also change the gene expression of tumors and prevent their growth. Animal studies show that it blocks androgen-stimulated prostate cancer, which is kind of dumb because androgen would be like testosterone, and testosterone does not stimulate prostate cancer. So I don't know where they came up with that crap. It's just not true. What about the safety of resveratrol? High doses, when you take high doses, it kind of inhibits the blood from clotting. In test tubes, it's possible that it could increase bleeding or bruising when taken with anti-clotting drugs such as heparin or warfarin, or even some pain relievers. If you're taking, for example, aspirin to prevent heart attacks, aspirin works through an anti-clotting mechanism. And if you take resveratrol in high doses with it, it'll accentuate that effect of aspirin. It can actually increase bleeding time because it inhibits clotting. Resveratrol also blocks some enzymes that help clear out certain compounds from the body, especially in the liver. This means some medications can build up to unsafe levels. The medications involved include blood pressure meds, anxiety medications, and immunosuppressant drugs. Following oral ingestion of resveratrol, as I said, it's converted the liver into metabolites that have unknown effects in the body. Only 14% of an oral dose of resveratrol reaches the blood. There is some evidence that ingesting resveratrol with quercetin will boost the absorption of resveratrol. The quercetin basically inhibits the liver enzymes that immediately convert resveratrol into the metabolites that I mentioned earlier. So if you take quercetin with resveratrol, there's a chance you get greater absorption of resveratrol. There's another kind of, I don't know if it's a form, it's a similar compound to resveratrol called pterostilbene, which is a methylated form of resveratrol, and it offers some of the same benefits as resveratrol, but it's much more, it's like 80% greater absorption than resveratrol when taken orally. But too much pterostilbene can also raise your LDL cholesterol level, which can be dangerous if you have any tendency to heart disease. The effect of, finally, I just want to mention the effect of resveratrol on exercise. It's paradoxical because in rodent studies, you give resveratrol to rats, mice, it increases muscular endurance by quite a bit. However, but in humans, it seems to inhibit some of the health benefits offered by exercise because of its antioxidant activity. As I said, in recent years, they found that free radicals, which are byproducts of oxygen metabolism, produced in greater amounts during exercise. They thought it was a very bad thing. Now they know that free radicals are actually produce some of the or promote some of the benefits of exercise, such as increased mitochondriogenesis and also increased insulin sensitivity. And when you take an antioxidant, a potent one like resveratrol, it kind of neutralizes the free radicals, and by doing so, it could potentially block some of the health benefits induced by exercise. I strongly have my doubts about this, though. In my Applied Metabolics, I'm going to write an article very soon, which looked at two popular antioxidant two antioxidant nutrients, vitamin C and E, which are also indicted as causing interference with exercise health benefits. And I'm going to provide evidence that it's just bullshit. In other words, it just doesn't happen. It's something that's more theoretical than actually occurring. There's been a ton of studies saying that don't take antioxidants prior to exercise or right after. It'll completely neutralize. I have always taken antioxidants before and after exercise, and I've never noticed any of these problems, which made me suspicious. And sure enough, I checked the literature and I found it's just bogus. It's just bogus. A lot of it's based on animal studies and test tube studies. And again, what happens in animals and test tubes doesn't always happen in the human body. But that's about it for resveratrol. If you want the most evidence-based, in-depth information on nutrition, exercise science, hormonal therapy, fat loss techniques that really work, anti-aging research, ergogenic aids, women's health and fitness, supplement science. Subscribe today to my Applied Metabolics newsletter, www.appliedmetabolics.com. When you subscribe, I'll send you an invitation to join my private Applied Metabolics Facebook page, where each day I post new information on nutrition, exercise, science, and general health and medicine. I also have an email portal on my Applied Metabolics website where current subscribers only. I don't answer questions from I don't answer unsolicited questions from non-subscribers. They can send me short questions. I'll be happy to answer only to subscribers. You're welcome to leave comments and suggestions for future videos under this video, but I generally don't answer questions under the videos. Again, I reserve the limited time I have to answer questions only from confirmed subscribers to my Applied Metabolics newsletter. So again, subscribe today. It's 40 to 50 pages every month. I guarantee you will learn something every issue, no matter what your level of education. www.appliedmetabolics.com. If you want to have the best friend you'll ever have, go to your local shelter, adopt a dog. Take care.